Decentralized Computing Revolution. Alessandro De Carli on Acura's Real-World Applications Part 2. In this episode, Dr. Jemma Green continues her conversation with Alessandro, exploring how Acura's smartphone-based computing network is disrupting traditional data centers. From the sustainability benefits of repurposing old phones to the practical applications in web scraping and AI, Alessandro reveals how his technology is creating new possibilities for decentralized computing. They also discuss the competitive advantages of mobile devices' energy efficiency and how they're addressing security concerns while scaling to challenge traditional cloud providers. I'm your co-host Anthony Pearl, and whether you're an investor or a startup looking for insights, it's time to get unblocked.
I would just like to add kind of an anecdote, not a question. I've been successfully running Acura's processors for over a year now, and I have to fully agree with you, Alessandro. I think it's the smoothest onboarding I've ever had, not just in Web3, but also in Web2 to ever run anything similar to this. It's literally as simple as scanning a QR code and basically the whole setup is done. And also what you said, kind of your last point, is every time I upgrade my phone, I have a new processor. So that means even just at home, I started with one, maybe two. And when I upgrade my phone, I add a new one. And I remember very early on in your story, I think it was only possible to run a processor on a Google Pixel phone initially. And I remember I was looking for Pixels in the European market, and it was almost impossible to find anything. In Switzerland, everything was sold. Any type of Pixel was completely sold out because everything was bought by people wanting to run Acura's processors. And when you were looking for Pixels within the European market, it was really difficult finding anything. And it was really interesting to see because people understood the value of running it and how cheap it is to actually run this processor, even with just old phones that they had at home, that just made it so simple and almost like no-brainer to just onboard it. And I think that is definitely part of the success that you've seen.
I mean, thank you so much for the kind words. Yeah, definitely. We're working hard to make it as easy as possible. And I mean, an aspect that we're not even advertising throughout the entire website is the aspect of the impact on the planet in terms of sustainability, right? Because people are effectively buying out phones that otherwise, it's quite crazy. You have to think about it. You have big tech investing billions in R&D, printing out these amazing mainboards and compute, and then people just throw them away after 1 or 2 years or put them in a drawer. Now, all of a sudden, all that engineering, all that tech waste, you can put it back into a productive system where you're able to squeeze out some very valuable compute that you can offer to somebody else, right?
There's just to that point again, do you have to be on a network as such? Because, we're all used to jumping on a network for our phones. And if you're using an old phone, you don't need that.
So you will need internet connectivity, but you won't need a separate SIM card that connects to cellular. So you can have, if you want, you can connect your processor over that line. But what we usually see is that people utilize either Wi-Fi or go over Ethernet, leveraging the USB-C connection of their phone.
It's a great way, as you say, for sustainability as well. And I imagine that's a very big argument for moving forward and using this, because what do you do with all the old phones? Where do they go?
Yeah, and we followed them. And where they all end up is basically in Hong Kong at a auction where you can purchase Samsung S23 by the kilo. Basically, you can purchase 100 kilo of iPhones, of Samsung devices and whatnot. What then usually happens is that some people utilize them for the gold and scrap value that it still has. But there are some other people that started really upcycling them to then create also these kind of racks where you have 20 devices in a single rack, just the main boards thereof, and then you can connect them to a network like Acura's to provide that compute.
And what's the plan in terms of telling everybody about this? Because obviously it's something that anyone can take up the opportunity with. So how do you get the word out there and make it simple for people?
So getting the word out there is extremely important, and I've been very, very grateful and thankful for the marketing team that we have that is really challenged with a very technical topic, and being then able to make this consumable for everyone is not so easy. So one of the main challenges here is translating the tech language to a language that everybody is capable of understanding it. And also the other big barrier is that many people are belittling the mobile device, thinking that it does not, like, it's unthinkable for them that this is a device that can be used for compute, right? So educating people and having a messaging that is very easy to consume is one way how we make this very visible to everyone. But the network, because it has two main stakeholders, so the consumers and the compute providers, needs to grow in a symmetric way. So if we just would have a lot of people onboarding compute on the network, that is great, but you still require then someone actually utilizing that compute for this to be sustainable. So my short answer is that maybe getting the word out to everyone just about how they can onboard compute is not the immediate best next step, because we need to find a balance between the two. So right now we have the issue that actually most of the compute is already being used up. So now it's a good moment again to push for people to onboard compute. And if there's listeners in here that are interested, please go to the app stores and search for Acurus, and you will be able to onboard very, very quickly. But there was a time where we had a oversupply, and then just onboarding more devices wouldn't necessarily translate to more value for the network, right?
Can I just ask, can you give us some good examples of who is using it and what they're using it for?
Yeah, absolutely. We have various verticals. Being a Web3 company, we do have a couple of larger foundations, like crypto foundations, utilizing and leveraging the security aspect of it, because it's basically a perfect fit thanks to the trusted execution environment that it has for running on-chain automations, for running bridges, for running things that basically require observation from one chain or service and then bring that to another service or chain. So those things is what we call like our Web3 on-chain automation vertical. That's where people utilize that, especially for the security aspect. But we then also have a very large usage from people that utilize this for web scraping and data kind of observations of the internet. So those people utilize it mostly because of the bandwidth aspect of the service provided. These are companies that offer a service to Google, OpenAI, all these large companies that require a view of the internet, heavily rely on web scrapers and residential kind of access to the internet, because I mean, Google is basically a web scraper, right? That is what they do. They scrape data and then offer you that data for indexing and for kind of search purposes, right? If you don't utilize a network like Acurus to do so, you will quite quickly get blocked because not everyone wants you to collect that data. So that is another Web2 use case where we have about 20,000 devices that are just web scraping every single day for data. And now, one thing that I'm super excited about is the ability to basically leverage the compute more. And that is by leveraging this unified memory architecture to run these AI models, like these LLMs nowadays. You have to run them with centralized clouds, right? That means that basically the centralized cloud has full access over your data, which is also a little bit the reason why we don't see more adoption of this technology, to be honest, with enterprises, because they don't necessarily want their data to be shared with big tech. And with Accurus, you're actually able to run these models privately and on your own, and then leverage also the compute aspect of it. So basically, it's a play where we receive a resource that is incredibly powerful, incredibly useful with various aspects, and then leverage those various aspects to offer services for people that then utilize those.
I had a question on the disruptive power of this technology and whether it's caught the attention of the big players. Related to that is, how much does it cost to use Acura service for compute purposes compared to, say, traditional, and particularly for AI? We obviously know there's a huge growth in demand for compute and electricity as well for servicing AI models. And in the energy space, which Power Ledger works in, like, so many very fascinating things happening. For example, in the US, real estate is being bought up or leased that was previously being used for industrial purposes, where they've got a big electricity connection and an offtake agreement to instead repurpose that for data centers to meet the growing demand. So there's no shortage of demand growth, but obviously the players would like the demand to accrue to their infrastructure and their services. Has what you're doing caught the attention of the bigger cloud service providers? And do you think that they will see your technology and also pricing as like real problem for them?
So this topic alone would be a topic that we can discuss for an entire afternoon, right? The race for having larger and larger data centers and what it means for things like energy infrastructure and for humanity in general, right? Because one of the bets of these hyperscalers, and like for instance also Meta was now planning to do this Hyperion data center, which has the size of Manhattan and basically is also consuming 5.7, or planned to consume 5.7 gigawatts, which is basically what Manhattan is consuming, right? So the reason for these players to do that is because they all think that will be soon in a world where if you're able to monopolize the access to this functionality and this technology, you will be ultimately able to control the world, right? And it is quite scary because the question is whether you want that or not as a human being. Now, when it comes to the question whether people have realized that Accurus is something that could be used to counter that, I do believe that, yes, to some extent, we do have quite a lot of growth on both the deployment and the onboarding side. So there are people that get the ideology behind it and profit already today from the cheap compute. I don't think that larger players really see this as a threat yet, which is a big advantage, I believe, because it's better to be underestimated than overestimated for sure. That being said, though, there are people in like in Microsoft specifically, who did start to get some interest in Accurus to understand what it's doing and whatnot. So it's probably not because they think that it is necessarily already a threat today, but they do see the traction behind it.
What about like Oracle? Like, because, they haven't got their own models, so they're not really a competitor, compared to the other tech companies. And they just announced a deal, I think yesterday, to be the supplier for data centers for OpenAI. Are you talking to companies like that about providing your services in additional to the traditional data centers?
So the technology in the form that you have it today is most valuable for its confidentiality and security aspect. So when it comes to an AI agent, as an example, you want to be able to give that AI agent your credit card, your logins for your emails, and so on and so forth. Today, if you do that, you would effectively be giving all of those credentials to a centralized cloud. That is a big no-no. That is a big problem, right? With Accurist, however, you're then able to say, okay, it is my personal confidential space that I am renting, but nobody else is capable of inspecting or tampering with. For that specific use case, it's a perfect match already today. When it comes to running LLMs, there are a set of limitations that we're working on, one of which is the limiting factor for running LLMs is effectively the memory that you have at your disposal. If you want to run one of the largest models, then you will require something like 10 big GPUs, right? And with Accurist, the mobile device, like the largest RAM allocation that you get is about 24 gigs of RAM. So today, we're not able to shard the model yet onto multiple devices. This means that you can only load models that fit into those 24 gigs of RAM.
The container of one device.
Exactly. These are all matrix multiplications that run in parallel that need to synchronize between layers, but can be completely sharded onto multiple mobile devices. It's just a matter of actually doing it. And that's one of the R&D projects that part of the team is working on today.
Got it. So that's a real kind of holy grail to be on a quid pro quo basis with the traditional cloud service providers as well.
Yeah. So I think in certain use cases, absolutely. I think in certain use cases, we are even winning already today with the offering. I mean, being able to run these data scrapers, you cannot run them on centralized clouds. Like it is effectively not possible, right? So I do think that being also a small team and a project that does have a lot of traction, but I mean, 100,000 devices is super exciting, especially in the short amount of time that we onboarded them, but it's just a little drop in the ocean, right? Like we need to grow this way more, and we need to do so in a smart way by basically first catering and onboarding the kind of use cases that work really well with the tech, and then expand on the use cases that are a perfect fit for the tech. That is our strategy today. Because if we would just go after everything all at once, you are master of nothing, right?
Definitely, yeah. It makes sense that you're, tackling the lower hanging fruit first. How does the cost compare for using compute? Like, could you just give a metric that might be more readily understandable to put into context how much cheaper Accurus actually is?
This is something that we haven't even touched on before when kind of highlighting the mobile device, but these are devices that never had the privilege of being connected to a power supply 24/7. So they need to be very efficient, have a very high compute density at a very low watt consumption. And if we take a look at what the cost structure and main challenge for these data centers is okay, you need to be able to source the hardware. That is a limiting factor. With Acurs, that's already cool because we're able to crowdsource that and upcycle devices that are already in the market out there. We're not blocked by anyone still needing to produce that. But the second factor is definitely the access to cheap energy, because these data centers consume so much. Now, mobile devices have a way lower cost consumption on the energy side compared to a server in comparison of the compute that they provide. And this is also the reason why I believe you can only run a decentralized compute network that is capable of competing with centralized offering on mobile device. Like no other hardware will be suitable for this because you will ultimately suffer from economies of scale where the others are just better off. And if you just use the same hardware there.
Gotcha. I was just going to ask as well, I mean, just for layman's terms, someone at a local level, they've got their phone, they're installing this. Are there any risks? Are there any things that someone should be aware of when they're doing this? How do you educate at that level?
I mean, you obviously, first of all, have a device, right? So if you're able to upcycle that device and buy it for relatively cheap, you don't risk the situation where you bought this device for let's say, accurate, and then you have a big cost expense on that side. So that is, in my eyes, a potential risk, but not necessarily a very large risk. The other thing to definitely discuss as well is that people will use your bandwidth to scrape data and so on and so forth. So today, Acurus is blocking all sorts of malicious website access and so on and so forth. Tomorrow, we will also have a whitelist approach where basically you're able to say, it's okay to utilize my bandwidth, but only if you go on these websites that I know are not malicious, right? But that is something that bandwidth will be ultimately used, which is not necessarily a big risk, because if you think about it, already today, it is possible that either your phone or your router or something has been infected with some malicious kind of code, and then someone is utilizing that bandwidth without you knowing it, right? Here you at least know that someone is deploying stuff, and it's all completely transparent, right? You're able to see who deployed what. And it was really important for us to have this still accessible for everyone so that it is completely safe. The last thing that I would say is, if you're planning to run hundreds of devices, you will also need to start thinking about the power consumption and also the electricity lines, right? If you live in an old house, and there's some houses here in Switzerland that still insulated with newspaper. And I don't know, I mean, if you start really getting a lot of energy in, those cables do get hot, and then maybe there is also a hazard there. But with mobile devices, way less than if you would run a server or something like that. But those are the risks that I can personally really think about. Other than that, I don't really see a risk.
Alessandro, what is your favorite song at the moment?
My favorite song. So, like, I'm from the Italian speaking part of Switzerland. So Italian songs have a special place in my heart. And at the moment, I'm listening a lot songs from this band called Articolo 31, which is not so known, let's say, for the English speaking people, but that's my favorite song for now.
I like listening to Italian music. I like Giovanotti a lot at the moment.
Nice.
So thanks for the tip. I'll definitely be looking it up. And I'm sure there'll be some other Italian song listening listeners to the podcast.
Yeah, let's hope. There are a few. Also,
I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and this conversation. The big takeaways for me is that what could otherwise end up in landfill or just be a lazy asset that's not utilized can be really have a true circular economy repurposing effort. And it's not just for the device itself, but it's displacing potential new infrastructure that's being built, not in the cloud space. And we know how demanding that can be in terms of energy consumption, but water as well, and the impact on local communities. It ticks a lot of boxes in terms of it being decentralized and a DAO, and having new use cases for cloud that aren't able to be used using traditional compute services. There's so many things about it which are really exciting, Alessandro, and I just wanted to acknowledge your real pioneering work that you're doing in this, and the successes that you have accrued so far in getting more than 100,000 devices on in such a short period of time. So we look forward to having a follow-up conversation with you and to see how things are tracking in the not too distant future.
thanks. Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be talking with you, Jemma, specifically, and now with Jacob.
Awesome.
That's all for this episode of Unblocked. Please check out the show notes for information on Power Ledger and other contact information. We welcome your comments and feedback, and please hit subscribe wherever you are listening. This podcast was produced by Podcasts Done For You. We look forward to your company next time on Unblocked.